Okay, so I wanted to take a look at this exercise. This is called the Pallof Press. And I wanted to talk about why I don't like this exercise. Now, firstly, let's look at this and just examine the position. So we have wide feet, extremely wide feet, much wider than hip width. We have a static position in the upper body, and we're just simply pushing away against that resistance band, which creates a rotational torque, but it's a static rotational torque, so it doesn't really create any movement in rotation. It creates resistance to rotation, which is something I'm not really a big fan of, especially if you're not programming actual rotational movement into your plan, which most people who, if they're in a weight training room like this, don't do. Now, if you're going to work on your movement, you must work on the movement, not resisting that movement. Resisting that movement doesn't improve that movement. It just increases resistance to that movement. So let's go to the next screenshot. There's quite a few arrows that I've put on here and lines that I've put on here to show the midline of the body and the feet position relative to the midline. So the green line is the midline, or representing the midline. And then the yellow line is representing the midline because we've got a slight off-camera angle here. Now, we can see how wide those feet are. That never occurs when we run. A lot of physical therapists and strength coaches give exercises like this in a particularly wide stance, which never occurs when we run. We actually want to get close to the midline. Not crossing the midline with the feet, but close to it. And this is definitely never going to get you to train the muscles and train the joint actions so that we can get close to that midline. So that's the first part of this, really, is the position of the feet and the, as I said, about the lack of movement, or the specific lack of movement. So what we're creating here is a abducted flexed hip position, which is something that never really occurs in running, particularly with that wide foot stance. The next part here is the level shoulders and level pelvis, again with the abducted hip position and the wide foot stance. So we never ever have a neutral spine when we run. So there is almost no point in really training for a neutral spine as a runner. I'm not saying that we don't have a neutral spine at other times, but if you're training for a dynamic movement, train for the dynamic movement. Don't train for a movement that doesn't occur. So here we've got pretty much perfectly neutral shoulder position, pretty much neutral pelvis position, at least in this frontal plane. So the pelvis is level there. Never occurs in running. So that's that one. And then the next one here, we've got the knee position relative to the hip joint. We have an outward position, which, again, if the feet are getting close to the midline, that doesn't occur. And then the knee position relative to the ankle position, and the ankle position relative to the foot. So we have this a slightly outward pointing feet here. And we have the yellow arrow is showing the force, the line of force. So we've got a supinating force. It's an eccentrically loading supinating force, which again doesn't occur in running, and it's not something that we want to promote or we want to work on. If you think about how you would sprain an ankle, that would be an eccentrically loading supinating force. So it would be taking you into extreme supination. So if you're not working on how you pronate, don't work on how you supinate, because you have more muscles that promote supination, or more force in supination than you do in pronation, because pronation is shock absorption and supination is where the power comes from, especially in the foot and ankle. So don't promote a supinated position or a force that takes you to supination if you're not promoting a pronation force as well. And in fact, a lot of issues happen because of sprained ankles. So what we need to do is we need to promote the pronation action and the forces which we want to produce to take us to pronation, because we get particularly bad at pronating. But none of this position will help with that at all. It will actually make it far, far worse and make your running form worse. The last thing here is the protracted shoulder position, which again, in running, we have what's called reciprocal motion, reciprocal movement, where one shoulder is going forwards as the other shoulder is going backwards, one shoulder is going upwards as the other one is going downwards, one shoulder is externally rotating as the other is internally rotating. They're never doing the same thing. They're always doing the opposite movement. Your hands won't be held out here, so the force that you're producing here to hold this position is completely irrelevant. And then the last thing here that the red arrow on the left is depicting is the flexed hip with a anterior tilt of the pelvis, which is going to take us into a hyperextended lumbar spine position, which is one of the things that I work with many injured runners on actually reducing. This position is one of an abducted hip position. It's going to tighten those TFLs. It's going to heighten and tighten the TFLs, which is not something we want to work on producing. Just everything about this exercise is just bad for runners. I genuinely see zero value for anybody in this exercise whatsoever. I just see no value, nothing ever are you ever going to do in this position with this force. It's completely illogical, and specifically for runners, as much as, or even indeed more than anybody else, it's totally irrelevant, should not be used. It's of no value. It's actually wasting your time and could even be producing poor movement and poor results, and actually really adding to the problems that you might have as a runner.